Back in September of last year, we covered the Terminus package, which was and still is the preeminent package for including a terminal directly within Sublime Text. Now, Terminus is cool for a variety of reasons. It is freely available, it's cross platform, so you can use it wherever you are running Sublime Text. But what's even better is you can use it to execute an interactive program in a build system, which is something that Sublime can't do on its own. Now, since that video, Terminus has continued to evolve and grow and get even better, and it is now easier than ever before to use Terminus in a build system. So in today's video, we're going to show you two different ways that you can do that very thing. Hello, fellow Sublime Text fanatics. ODAT Nerd here, slightly sick, but here to bring you a video on using Terminus to execute build systems in Sublime Text. Now, this is a topic we have covered in a couple of previous videos on the channel, but Terminus was and still is the preeminent package for including a terminal directly inside of Sublime Text. And the great thing about this, besides the fact that it is freely available and cross-platform, so no matter whether you run Sublime Text on Windows, macOS, or Linux, this package will seamlessly work for you across all of those platforms. It supports its inclusion in a Sublime Text build system, which allows you to execute builds directly within a native terminal, but still inside of Sublime Text. And there's a few reasons why you might want to do that. And the biggest one is that you can run an interactive program because Sublime doesn't support that very thing by default. You do need a third-party package for this. Now, we originally covered this a few months ago, and Terminus has just continued to get better. It's now easier than ever before to use Terminus inside of a build system. So in today's video, we're going to cover how you could take any existing, currently working build system and convert it for use in Terminus. And the same information will, of course, also apply if you're creating your own build system from scratch. As we'll see, there's only a couple of things that you need to add to a build to get it to work with Terminus. But since we've already covered build systems and how they work in previous videos, here we're mostly going to cover how you could take an existing build system and convert that one over. As is generally the case in these videos, we're using the package dev package, which is going to give us enhanced command completions while we're working in Sublime build files and better syntax highlighting. So if you're not already using that package, why the heck not? It is a great package. But if you're not using it, you'll have to do a little bit more work manually, and you will see different syntax highlighting, but everything we're going to cover here still generally applies. We're also going to be showcasing, again, the origami package, which is also something we have covered in a previous video on the channel. And that's something you might want to install if you've ever wanted your build system to execute to the right or the left of a window instead of just always in a panel at the bottom. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the official documentation for Sublime Text build systems, along with my own video series on build systems, are linked down in the description of this video for your perusal. So with all of that boilerplate out of the way and my voice getting a slightly scratchy here, let's go ahead and jump on into how we might start converting a build system for use in Terminus. To start with, we're going to need a build system that we can actually modify. Now, here we are taking an existing build system and augmenting it to use Terminus, but you could just as easily apply these exact same techniques to a build system that you're currently building as well. We're not going to cover how build systems work in general because we have covered that in a previous video on the channel. But what we are going to have to do is find the build system that we want and open it up. Now, if this is a build system that you've created yourself, you probably have a pretty good idea of how to do that. And we're going to cover how we do that in just a second as well. But let's say it's not a build system that you have created and you're using one of the build systems that ships with Sublime or with some other package and you'd like to be able to augment it. Well, you need to know which build system you are actually using. And if we go to the Tools menu under Build System, this is where all the build systems that are currently known to Sublime Text reside. And they appear between the automatic entry, which is the top of this particular menu, and the new build system entry at the bottom. Build systems are displayed in this particular menu based on the name of the file that they are stored in. So the Python build system is in a python.sublime build file, and the Rust build system is in a rust.sublime build file, and so on. Now, it is possible to have build systems that are project specific, and in that case, those build systems would be inside of the Sublime project file. They will appear here in this menu, and they'll be in a special section at the top between automatic and ActionScript. I don't have any in this particular case. And if you want to get to those particular build systems, then you want to go to the project menu and choose the edit project item here while you have your project open. That'll get Sublime to open the Sublime project file for you, and you'll see your build systems directly inside there. For all other build systems, the easiest way to do this is to use view package file from the command palette, and of course this shows us every available resource in every available package. And we will know that build systems are in Sublime build file, so that filter will filter this list to only builds systems. And then we need to determine the name of the build system that we're using. Now here in this particular video, we're going to be showcasing this with the Python build system because I commonly get asked how people could use Terminus with Python. So we're going to cover that here. But again, this same process, as you'll see in just a second, really applies to any build system that exists. So I'm going to do that, and we can see here, this is the python/python.sublime build file. So this is the one that ships with Sublime Text in the Python package. If you've already created your own Python build system, there'll be multiple entries in here. Make sure you pick the one that you want to be editing. So we're going to pick that, and we're going to open this particular file. Now, the first thing to note here is that because this is a package that ships with Sublime, no matter how much I type, I can't actually edit this file at all. If this was a build system that you created, you would be able to edit it, so you're good to go. But for everybody else, like for example, in this case, this is a build system we want to edit, but we can't. What we're going to do here is create our own build system based on this one. So to do that, just select all the text and copy it. Then we go into the Tools menu and to the Build System menu, and the bottom item in this menu is New Build System. That's going to open a stub file that is a build system. Select all the text and paste, then press Save. Sublime is going to show us the file save dialog. It's always going to put this directly in our user package, which is where we want this. And then we just need to save this under a name so that we'll know what it is. And since build systems do appear in the build menu based on the name of the file, it might be a good idea to name this something slightly distinct from the name of the file it's based on so that you can distinguish it. So in this case, I'm going to call this the Python Terminus build system, and I'm going to specifically include the Sublime-build extension on the file because Sublime does use the standard operating system save dialogs, and on some operating systems, they won't include the extension on the file. And if that's the case for you, when you save the file, if it doesn't have this extension, Sublime's not going to recognize it as a build system. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit the key there, and now we immediately get ourselves some syntax highlighting in here because I am using the package dev package, and we are ready to start augmenting this build system for use with Terminus. When Sublime executes a normal build system, it opens a panel at the bottom of the window and the build output is displayed in there. And if you like that functionality but you want to use Terminus to execute the build, that is very easy to do. And the starting point is a build system that we would like to modify, which as we just saw is this one is the Python build system that ships directly with Sublime Text. Now, previous versions of Terminus were more restrictive in what could appear in a build system here, but it is much better now than it was back then. So as we'll see here, there's only a couple of keys that can appear in a standard build system that won't work in a Terminus build, but we're going to cover those near the end of the video. So make sure you keep watching so that you get that key information so that you're not confused. And what we have to do here is add an extra key to this build to tell Sublime that instead of treating this as a normal build, it should allow Terminus to execute the build. And that is very easily done by including the target key, which is something we have seen in previous videos. This is going to tell Sublime to execute a custom command instead of what it would normally execute to execute this build. And the command we want in here is the Terminus exec command, like so. And that technically is the only thing you need to add, and your build system is now a Terminus build system. It's just that easy. This Terminus exec command is a near drop-in replacement for the standard exec command. So right now, this will work for us and execute the build in a panel at the bottom of the window. But before we continue, let's add one more key here, and that is the cancel key. And this is a key that tells Sublime how to stop a running build, which you might want to add because standard build systems can be canceled by using the Tools Build Cancel item from the menu or from the command palette. And that allows you to stop a build that's currently running if it's taking too long. You might want to have that functionality here in Terminus as well. And this is very easy to do. We just say Terminus cancel build as the argument to the cancel, and that is all we need. Now, of course, if your build system already has a target key in it, then you may want to investigate what already custom command is being used to execute that build, because if you swap it for Terminus, that may cause problems. But this is just a standard build system for Python. And now if I jump over to this particular window here, we can see this is just a simple Python program that's going to ask me for my name and then print it out. This wouldn't work if we were using a standard build. For example, if I use build and choose the Python build, that's the one that ships with Sublime, it's going to open in that panel down at the bottom of the window. I have to click in there with my mouse to give it the focus, and no matter what I type, nothing actually happens in this build because Sublime doesn't allow you to execute interactive builds. That's why we're going through this whole process to begin with. So I'm just going to go ahead and cancel that build, like so, and close that panel. But if we do build with again, and this is tools build with in the menu, and if you're not sure how builds work, there is that video series that I mentioned previously linked down below that goes into this in detail. I'm going to choose the Python Terminus build. That's the one we're currently building. And now we get a Terminus panel down at the bottom of the window. And again, I have to click to give that the focus. But when I type my name and type it correctly, the build actually works, and it's even telling me how long this thing was actually running. Now, the standard build results are available by pressing the Shift Escape key. As we can see here, if I push that, it toggles back and forth between those two things. And they're also available down here from this panel switcher at the bottom of the window. This item, build results, shows you the standard build system results, and output Terminus build results will bring this back if you don't use the key binding for that. Now, as we saw, there's a couple of things we might want to change about this, because when we run the build, we have to manually click in this thing in order to give it the focus, because it's mimicking what the standard build does. Standard builds aren't interactive, so Sublime doesn't give it the focus. There's really no reason for doing that sort of thing. And also, it's giving us the time that it took to execute, but maybe we don't want to be able to do that. So to continue, I'm going to choose build cancel, and we'll see we can cancel this build the same as we cancel the other one, and that's because of this cancel line we added in line 3 of this file. And there's a couple of extra arguments that you can give the terminus exec command that the normal build systems don't allow, that will allow you to make changes to how this is working. And the first one we're going to use here is the focus key. This has a default value of false, but we can set it to true here. And now when we run the build, the Terminus will automatically focus that panel for us so we can type into it. Because if we expect this to be interactive, we probably want to be able to interact with it. And the other thing we can add in here is an argument named timeIt. This value is defaults to true, but we could, if we wanted to, set it to false like so. So we can save this file. And now when we come back, what we're going to find is when I build, it automatically has put the focus down there. I didn't have to click. I can give it my name. And when I hit enter, it tells me it's done, but it doesn't tell me how long it was actually running. So using just these two simple lines inside of a functional build system, you can use Terminus and have it converted to be using Terminus as the command to execute it and get your interactive builds. The standard builds only execute in a panel at the bottom of the window, but Terminus can create terminals both down in the panel area and in a regular file view. So if we want to, we can create a build system that will execute in a tab instead of in a panel at the bottom of the window. And that is handy if you wanted to have your code and your build running side by side, for example. So here we are back with the same sample that we originally started with, the default Python build system that I have saved in my user package as Python Terminus. And what we can do here is similar to what we would have done before. We're going to add the target key to tell Sublime that we want to execute a different command other than what it would normally execute. And we need to provide a Terminus command here. But this time we're going to use Terminus open. And if you've watched the previous video, this used to be the only way to do this, but Terminus open can now be used to create files in a tab, and it's a lot easier than it used to be. Now, previously we added a cancel key here to be able to cancel a build by using the cancel item in the menu and in the command palette. But now that the build is running in a tab, if we want to cancel the build, we can just close the tab. So we don't need to include that particular item. So this one line is the only thing that we need to add inside this build, and our build will now execute in a tab. So if I come back to the code and press Control B, we see I get a tab here named Command Prompt. It's asking me what my name is. The focus is directly in it. I can type my name and hit enter, and oh, the tab went away. So there is a little bit more things that we can do in here, and let's go ahead and tackle all those. So I'm going to jump back to here. Now, the first thing we might note is that that thing immediately closed because Terminus views normally close when you close the terminal because you don't want them anymore. But we can add an item in here of auto close, which defaults to true, and set that to false. And now that we have done that, this build will automatically not do that. Another thing we might have noticed there is that the tab was named command prompt because that's the name of the configuration that is being used for these particular by Terminus configuration. But that might not be that interesting. You might want to have it actually named for the program you're building or the project you're building or something along those lines. But we can add a key in here named title and provide a title string here. So we could say Python output, for example, like so. And now when the tab is created, it'll be created with that name instead of with the other name. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now when we come back, I push Control B, we get a tab. The tab is named Python output. I can enter my name and it has executed and it's done. Now, we're also not seeing the total execution time in this thing, but if we wanted to do that, we could do that the same as we did by adding the items in the panel view of this, and we could add time it here and say that we do in fact want to time the execution of this build so that we can see how long it took, if that's something you want to do. And something else to note is that it is creating the tab and focusing it, but the file layout, window layout is still one column, so we can't see the code when we at the same time as the build. But we can actually set it up to do that because Terminus has a post window hooks functionality that allows you to tell it what extra commands to execute after it opens a terminal. And we can actually use that in conjunction with the origami package, which is something that we have covered in a previous video, to open up the panel and also move that build over to a new window group at the same time. And in order to do that, we're going to add an item here. Now, the actual way to do this is outlined in the documentation for Terminus as an example of a key binding command you could use to open a terminal in a tab and move it over. Here I'm just referring to something on my extra monitor over here, so I'm going to be looking over to the right to make sure I enter this correctly. But I'm not going to provide a link to that because it is in the documentation, and you'll see it when you look in there. And the key we want to add in here is post window hooks, like so. This is a list of commands that should be executed after the terminal is created, so that needs to be square brackets like so. And we notice that if we are using the package dev package here, that it will tell you when you have forgotten to add a comma by showing you the syntax highlighting problems. Now, inside of this, we need to essentially, if you watched last week's video on the chain of commands command for executing multiple commands, this is doing the exact same thing as that particular package is. So every item in this needs to be a list that specifies the content of one command. And the first item in this is the command to actually execute, and that is the origami command carry file to pane. And that needs some arguments. So the second item in this list is the arguments array, or sorry, the arguments object. And this particular command takes arguments of direction and a value of left, right, up, or down. So here I'm going to use right. And we're going to go ahead and save that. And now we are ready to go. And remember, if you don't know how to figure out what those commands actually are, there's a video on the channel that tells you how to do that. So I'm going to come back over here to this and execute the build. And it has executed the build. It has sent the focus over to that and split the window. So now we can see, well, what is currently the build system here and the output on the left there. But it has opened it. It has given the tab the title that we want. I can enter my name like so and hit enter, and it's telling me how long it took me to do that because I added that time it over in the other window, and I can go ahead and close that again. One other thing to point out here, and this works both in a view and also in the panel version, which we just saw, is that if there was something that was broken with your code, then of course when you execute it, say Python or whatever tool you're using is going to generate some form of error as a result of that. Now, build systems can have a file regex and in some cases also a line regex key, and Sublime uses those as regular expressions to determine when errors are happening and to capture the error name itself, the file name, and the location inside of the file where that happens so that you can navigate to errors. And previously, when we looked at this Terminus build system in that previous video, this is something that wasn't allowed in a build system, but it is allowed now and it is actually supported. So if I bring my mouse in here and I double click on this error here, it will automatically open the appropriate file and focus it on exactly the part of this code that is broken. And again, that will work even if it's in a panel. We didn't demonstrate that, but this will work the same way. Now, something to note here is that if you were to go into the Tools Build Results menu, this next result and previous result, these won't navigate you between multiple errors if there happens to be one, because those are specific to the command that runs normal builds. And this is using Terminus, so that part doesn't apply. But this double click will always apply. Even if the file's not currently open, like this, when I double click it, it will open that file and focus the exact line that was broken. Now, as we've seen so far, there are two different targets we could apply in our build system depending on how we want it to execute. If we want it to execute in a panel at the bottom of the window, then we can use the terminus exec target, which is what we have in the sample file here right now. If instead we'd rather have it open in a file tab, we use the terminus open command instead. Now, these two commands take the same arguments, they only differ in what the default values for those arguments are. And if you remember back to the earlier part of the video, the very first build we did in a panel at the bottom of the window, the focus wasn't in there, and we had to add an argument of focus true, which again is in this example file right now, in order to tell Sublime to please put the focus inside of that panel, because normally builds aren't interactive, so Sublime doesn't put the focus in there. We didn't have to do that when we opened the build in a tab, because tabs generally have the focus. The default value for that argument in a terminus open is true, and it's false for terminus exec. Now, both of these commands take almost exactly the same arguments as the exec command built into Sublime does. That's the command that is responsible for executing builds if you're not using a target key. So these are near perfect drop-in replacements for the exec command. And I say near perfect not because these commands are flawed in some way, but because the exec command supports two arguments for, I think, legacy reasons, if I'm being honest, that Terminus does not support. And those are the last two lines in this file here, lines 8 and 9, shell true, and this path line. Now, when you execute a build with command and the key, which is what this it has here right now, what this is telling the command that's executing this particular build, whether it's Terminus or the command that's built into Sublime, is please ask the operating system to find and directly execute the program in the first argument, and then pass the rest of those values as arguments to that command. So it's directly finding Python and executing it. Sometimes you might want to actually execute a command by asking the system command interpreter, which is the command prompt on Windows or Bash on Linux or Mac OS, if it could execute a command instead. If you were doing something like input redirection or trying to chain multiple commands together, the way the C single file build does, for example. And in that case, you would need to add this shell true line in here in order to tell the underlying thing that it should do that instead of directly executing this Python line. Terminus doesn't support this particular key, and if you try to execute a build with this shell true line in it, it will fail. And once that happens, it might continue to not work, in which case you'd have to go to the view menu and choose the show console item. The console will open down there, and if you see any terminus errors, that means something like this has happened. You may need to quit and restart Sublime in order to clear the error state so that things will continue to work. This is sort of a legacy option because if you want the shell to execute something, you don't need to include shell true. You just need this thing to be shell command instead, like this. And instead of a list of strings, you give it one string. So you would combine all of these items together like so in this particular case. And now we've converted this to a shell command. But the file name might have spaces in it, and command interpreters use spaces to determine where one argument stops and the next one starts, which is why you often see these things specified with slash quotes around them. So if your build uses the shell true item, then you should remove shell true and convert your command to a shell command. And if it's already using shell command, you don't need that shell line in there anyway. This one here, this path line, is telling Sublime to specifically modify the path of the running Sublime Text instance before it tries to execute the command in that first item of the command array so that it can be found. And we've gone over this in a previous video on paths and how they work in Sublime Text build systems. And the terminus command also doesn't use this. So ways around this are modify your system's path environment variable to include the path you need so that you don't have to put it in your build system at all. And in the particular case of Python, particularly on Windows, when you run the installer, there's a checkbox in there that asks you if you should add Python to the path. You should say yes in that case. Another thing you could do is take this entire string that is the name of the directory where this Python item is going to be. We could cut it out of there and paste it into the shell command item as the first item in the line. That makes it a very long line indeed. And now this doesn't have to be in the path because we're specifically telling the operating system where to find this thing. And that's kind of ugly. So one other thing that you could do, and we want to get rid of this path line because it's not going to work anyway, is to include a key named env like so. This is something that allows us to add additional environment variables to the execution of the command when it's executing. So we could include path in here as an environment variable, and as the value of this, the first thing we might put is $path. That's going to expand out to whatever the path currently is, because otherwise we're going to make the path be only one thing, and that's probably not going to be correct. If you are on Windows, add a semicolon. If you're on Linux or macOS, add a colon instead. Then paste in that particular string just like so and hit save. So now what we have done is we've told Terminus in this case, and this would also work in the standard build system as well, when you pass the Python -u command to the system command interpreter to execute this, please also tell it that the path should look like this. And now that I've done that, when I come over here and execute the build, I have to choose the build system that we're going to use. That's the Python Terminus build, and it is executing down there in the panel, and it is working exactly the way we might like it to. So as we can see, whether you want to have your build system executing in a panel at the bottom of the window, like a standard build, in a regular file tab, or even split off to the side of your window, all of these things are now ridiculously easy to do with Terminus. This package just continues to get better and better. And this is a good reminder that whenever you see one of your packages has updated, you might want to jump back to the package page for that package, look at the documentation, and see what new features have become available. And that's all we have for this particular video. I hope you found it informative, and it's going to make your life a little bit more sublime. And if that is the case, please do show your support by using those buttons down below. Make sure that if you want to see future videos when they arrive on the channel, you subscribe so that you will know as soon as they drop. And remember, you can always use the comment section below if you have any questions, comments, requests for clarification, or even suggestions for other topics you'd like me to cover in a future video. But until those future videos, this is ODAT Nerd asking you to please have a sublime day.